Arranging. When I try and define this word, I struggle to come up with anything useful. In fact, let's do that right now. Let's come up with a good definition for an arrangement or musically arranging something, I guess. Arranging. Using an original musical composition as the basis for a new version of the piece or song. This could be altering the style, instrumentation, or certain aspects of the melody, harmony, or rhythm. Is that good? I think it's good enough. I studied arranging at university, and it was actually one of the major focuses of my degree, the other being composition. When I tried explaining that to people, I basically just said I was covering a song in a way that made it different. Or I used adverts as an example. Take a nice piece of music, play it on a piano, and emotionally manipulate your customer base.
It works.
I really wanted to explore this idea of what actually makes an arrangement. What do arrangers, technical term, keep in mind when they're composing new material for a new composition or a new arrangement? As an example, we're going to use Green Hill Zone. Originally in the game Sonic the Hedgehog in 1991, this piece of music has had about 30 years for people to explore different ideas. We've got lots of material to take from. Also because the Sonic games really like to retread old ground and they don't like to come up with anything original. Sonic the Hedgehog. Well respected by all and a timeless classic. I've never actually completed that game. The second piece of music you will likely hear when you load up the game is Green Hill Zone. This piece of music was composed when sound chips for consoles had quite a few limitations. There's people who can explain it far better than me, but from what I know, you can't have a full orchestra playing your soundtrack in the 90s, basically. From what I understand, it's three major parts. So you've got your digital to analog converter, which is like samples and like drums and sound effects. You've got a few channels of FM synthesis, which is frequency modulation synthesis, I believe. And then you've got some programmable sound generators, which are basically used mainly for square waves and I think also noise generation as well. I was able to download a MIDI file for Green Hill Zone, and I also managed to download a sound font for the original Sonic games. This means we can put it all in a Logic session and have a deep dive into the actual original material, so we can see what's happening and we can then study it and use it for our later ideas for arranging. Let's dive into the session. So, we've got our original A section. So one thing that's kept relatively the same is the drums. Very simple, kick, snare, hi-hat. One other thing is the marimba that introduces the piece, which is rather strange. From what I can tell, they were panned hard left, hard right, so you can get this weird like clicking between ears. It's quite strange. You've got these brass voices doing the chords. And what's weird about those is that they're all on separate channels, so no channel can play two notes at the same time, it seems. They're all mono. You've got to split up these chords between the channels to make it sound like a full chord. You also have these square waves doing their thing. That's your main bulk. You also have the bass. I'm going to pair that with the drums because it's a really good rhythm section. Just the same note lengths over and over again on the bass. Works quite well. Let's move on to the B section in full. The most iconic part, I suppose, is actually this melody here. The reason I've called that a choir melody is because on the sound font I downloaded, that is actually called the Green Hill Zone Choir. That's that sound. If that is really a choir, that's quite interesting because it's a very interesting sound. Very iconic, obviously, but maybe not sounding how it's intended. For the full section, you've got your square waves doing your chords. You've got those little mono lines. They're sort of like implied harmony almost. Like they're not real chords, but they sort of contribute to the overall tonality of that section. You also have this really odd high melody. I think it complements really well in the second half of the B section. Yet again, with everything else. Of course, it's nice to have that melody twice because it is a very good melody, but to keep it different, they've added that in the second half. I think that's quite interesting. And then you go for your absolute madness of your second half, your C section. Now, I think what's funny here is that you've got your square wave playing this sort of melody, big movement of all these chords and stuff. And I think it's interesting that you get this full... The bass sort of takes a melodic role there. It's quite interesting how, you know, you get those sort of matches. Also in this section, you have these high strings doing this sort of arpeggiated chord. You also have this little melodic sting coming out of the C section to sort of tie it all into like a neat little knot. That's actually paired between different instruments. That's brass and then the square wave as well. But I do really think that sort of adds to it. You don't really get much of a lead out of that section. It would just be that held note. The melody in that part is doing something... And that's funny because I also hear other parts of that within the melody. I think that's making sort of like a combined melody with all the melodic stuff. If I was just singing that melody line in my head, I would actually add notes in between where it's just silent. Because for some reason, to me, that's what is implied through that. But overall, just a fantastic sounding. What's interesting as well is that in this C section, they actually keep the beat straight. So a big unison change in terms of rhythm for all the other instruments, but then the drums. So I think this is brilliant. I think all this works really well. I think all the layers complement each other really well. I think it's very interesting how it's all sort of not done with one instrument. Everything is complementing each other, like in the way of making like implied harmony through all the melodies that you're playing at the same time. Through the bass as well, obviously anchoring you to what chord you're playing all the time, sort of playing that root note, which is a bit of a sin for bass apparently, but I think there's a lot we can take from this. I think we can obviously have a look at these individual layers and see what we could apply them to. Maybe we could apply them to different instruments. But yeah, that's Green Hill Zone. I love it. It's got a lovely nostalgic melody with nice jumps. It's got cool rhythmic sections. It's also got the wackiness that any good game with a colourful mascot needs. What more do you want? I can also imagine what it sounds like on real instruments, which I think is the piece doing its job. This makes me wonder how it was actually composed. Masato Nakamura, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, was originally a session bass player by trade, so the fact that he was actually composing full suites of pseudo-orchestral score for a Sonic game is quite strange. I did, however, check out his band, Dreams Come True. In one of these songs, I found some really nice piano playing, but that was likely played by Takahiro Nishikawa. I hope I'm also pronouncing that right. He was the keyboard player in that band, but I can imagine Nakamura maybe composed all the music. He'd seemed to be sort of like the main band leader of that band, so we can imagine maybe he was the composer. So what are the important elements of this piece of music? I would probably say the melody in the B section is basically irreplaceable. I imagine you could maybe change the rhythm of it ever so slightly. Maybe that would still lead to people recognizing it. For the most part, we'll leave that relatively unchanged. We could also do one of my favorite tricks and make the drums halftime like you do in any good metal song. We could even change the chords underneath. I would like to think you could maybe do like a jazz reharmonization of this song, so like that would be the main thing you change if you did that. I think the C section would have to make some comeback as well. It's just too good to leave out. I really think the piece of music is missing something if you don't include at least the B in the C section. The A section is more of an intro. I think you could drop it if you wanted to. Let's say we love all three sections, like I do. We're keeping all three in. So let's have a look at some of the other versions that have been used in the Sonic games throughout the years as well. Sonic Generations Act 1. This version's basically the same. They changed the beat that plays with some horrible cheesy samples as well. I'm not the biggest fan of that, but personal taste. I also really like this harmony that they added to the melody in the B section in this version. I really think it adds something to later versions of that section, and I might steal it. I understand that this version is trying to evoke those similar emotions that Green Hill Zone did back in the 90s, so we can't really blame it for being too unoriginal. For all intents and purposes, this is trying to remind us what Green Hill Zone is, and that means we can get on to Sonic Generations Act 2. This version is so much fun. It has Jun Senoue written all over it. Oh, yeah, there you go. The slap bass, the rock drums, and those great bits of brass, the rhythmic stabs, it's fantastic. It sounds very similar to the Sonic Heroes era of games. I do think this was somewhat intentional because the band that Jun Senoue was in, Crush 40, did sound a lot like this. I do think something that's really interesting in this version is the A section. That melody is treated like a big jazz brass section. You could probably call this soul-y, but I would probably leave that to people who know more what they're talking about. And this version also does that breakdown to halftime, which I was talking about. I do think when you change it up slightly, it does add something to this sort of generic looping form of these pieces. Another thing to mention is this insane riff that Jun Senoue plays in the A section. It's bonkers. I wonder if I could play that. We might leave you in the backdrop. That looks fine. Sonic Mania Act 1. This is the best version. Don't fight me. If Sega do this fucking level again, I will scream. T. Lopez is a genius. I think I'm pronouncing that right. He manages to keep that sort of nostalgic feel of the Mega Drive era, but also manages to add this freshness that's sort of like fusion. It's great. It's lovely. I could literally listen to it for hours. I think I have. Not much else to say apart from it's amazing. It's obviously the same as the original, but it's also just, it's beautiful. Sonic Mania Act 2. This version is lovely. I love the fact that it feels sort of like an awards ceremony version of Green Hill Zone. I could imagine this being used at like an actual Game Awards, if Sonic was actually recognised at the Game Awards. Baldur's Gate 3 won loads of stuff anyway, that's fine by me. What's very funny about all the Act 2 stages in Sonic Mania is that they seem to add this new section to keep things different and fresh. To all the old material, they add this new flair to it. Could literally make an entire review about why I love Sonic Mania. Also, a game that I've not complete, but I still love it. The groove in this one seems to be somewhat Latin inspired, and the bass line is almost like a walking bass line. It's very cool. It's grabbing from all these different places that you wouldn't really expect. Every single element is just, quite frankly, amazing. I can't seem to keep up with it. Oh my god, I just got that. It's a Sonic game you can't keep up with. Sonic Symphony. So I was actually very lucky to attend the Sonic Symphony show in London. I heard the Sonic the Hedgehog medley live in person, and it was very, very good. This was probably one of the best gigs I ever went to, especially because of the band set at the end, but also the crowd were actually singing so loudly I couldn't hear it, which is a very unique problem to have. I think I would probably sit a bit closer if I was to go again, if I get that lucky. The orchestral part of the show didn't have this problem, thank God. But this version only really lasts for less than a minute, so we can't really have much to draw from. One thing that they do in this version is they add a counter melody to the A section, and it's really, really cool. It's a nice little addition. I think I might steal that. But in this version, the strings are playing the harmony a bit differently. They're playing it on the offbeats. quite a good choice considering you get these big stacked orchestra voicings. It's very, very nice. And that's about all I can say for the Sonic Symphony version, really. It's just lovely. Did you know that Koji Kondo was very heavily inspired by American jazz fusion music? You can hear that in this clip here. I also really like that stuff from the 70s and 80s, but I also really like Japanese jazz fusion from that era too. Stuff like Cassiopeia, and then a bit later you've got Dimension and T-Square. Then if you know me, it's no secret that I love Plini, and I like Periphery and all that sort of stuff. So more like metal fusion, metalcore.
Gent.
One thing I like doing as well is I like matching guitar lines with sax lines, so they sort of form this nice unison thing. But I sometimes emulate that with synths as well. I'm going to be using some quite heavy drums, but I think that sort of works in this setting. I might also use some orchestral layers. Let's see what I can do. Thank you for watching. This is going to be the first video of a long series, hopefully, where I do more of these. I really like these video game compositions, and I want to be exploring them a bit further. I've got loads of Pokemon games that I really like. You know, I mean, Breath of the Wild's an absolute masterpiece. We could also go for stuff like, well, I mean, there's some stuff in Baldur's Gate that's really good. There's just loads of really good video game music. Loads of good music in general. I would like to explore more of this. I'd also like to share some more original music. I just want to talk about some musical moments that I really like. Talking about music for me is very enjoyable, and if I can have an outlet for that on the internet, I'll take it. Sorry if the audio is not great in this video. I've had lots of issues with microphones recently. This seems to be an okay system, I think. This is a new process for me. I've not really made a video like this before, so it's quite interesting to give it a go. But hopefully you enjoy it, and I'll see you soon.